Nowadays, everyone who has played a Fire Emblem game at least once knows about casual mode. That one option letting you play Fire Emblem at one's leisure without worrying about units getting permanently killed in battle. The mode feels synonymous with the series now, but unless you haven't touched the 3DS/Switch era of games, you'll know that's not really true. After all, casual mode started being a mainstay addition starting from the 12th game in the series right before Awakening, and yet its history isn't quite clear-cut as one would think. Considerations for a more casual approach to Fire Emblem began much earlier than casual mode in New Mystery. To get into exactly what I mean, this brief video will dive into the history of Fire Emblem's casual mode, why it became a must-add addition so late into Fire Emblem's history, and how its conception, oddly enough, can be traced back to the Super Famicom era. In the Iwata Asks for 2010's New Mystery of the Emblem, a developer interview done by the late Satoru Iwata, the then president of Nintendo, it's touched upon what exactly is the essence of Fire Emblem, what gives the series its identity, and beyond its characters, RPG-styled elements, and strategy tactics gameplay, the Fire Emblem developers identified that a key appeal was the idea that defeated characters in combat would die and thus become unusable from that point onwards. In short, permadeath. Iwata, to begin, I would like to ask you about the characteristics of Fire Emblem. In previous Iwata Asks, we talked about what is typical for Mario or Zelda. Mr. Maeda, being a former fan of the series, what would you answer if you were asked what is typical for Fire Emblem? Maeda, I think one aspect is the attachment to the characters, the fun of working hard on training the characters. Another part is the enjoyment of using your head while fighting enemies and skillfully defeating them. In my opinion, a good combination of those two things makes Fire Emblem. Iwata, indeed, in having a lot of likable characters, an RPG-like story, and combining all that in a tactical game, I think Fire Emblem probably stands as a pioneer. However, since those kinds of games have been accepted by the world, there were many other attempts to create such a combination. What aspect do you think positions Fire Emblem as unique among them? Maeda, in my opinion, it is the fact that the friends who have fallen in battle cannot return. Higuchi, to be honest, even among the development team, conversations about what makes Fire Emblem come up from time to time, but the answers to that vary between staff members. Some say with Fire Emblem, it's all about the story, but there are also those who answer the many characters that appear are great, and those who say the strategical back and forth of a tactics game are fun. In my personal opinion, what is fundamentally interesting about Fire Emblem is the fact that fallen friends don't revive and that it expresses the importance of human life. The interview later discusses some decisions Intelligent Systems made by then to make Fire Emblem more friendly to newcomers. Shadow Dragon added strategic save tiles in maps which players could use to save their current progress, but this didn't quite do the trick from their point of view, which is then when the discussion moved to the possibility of bringing characters killed in battle back to life, a proposal which came from Nintendo themselves. Higuchi, yes, what Nintendo suggested was that it might be good for fallen characters to revive for the next map, so that as many customers as possible could enjoy the game. When I heard that, I thought, if we do something like this, it won't be Fire Emblem. Iwata, that's because you believed for many years that a feeling of tension arose precisely because they can't be revived, right? Higuchi, that's right. I believed it was Fire Emblem's most appealing part, its distinction, so I thought I could definitely not compromise on this, which turned into a long and intense discussion with Nintendo. Because permadeath was such a big part of Fire Emblem's identity, the discussion kept going for a while, with Intelligent Systems being unwilling to compromise on it. However, for the sake of being open to more perspectives, a prototype of the game without permadeath was given a shot inside Intelligent Systems' headquarters, and upon noticing a staff member who was not a Fire Emblem fan became more willing to finish the game, various staff members started to come around on the idea, and figured it effectively worked as one extra layer of difficulty in practice. By the end, Intelligent Systems admits that the whole ordeal for its inclusion more or less lasted 4 months, and just like that, casual mode came to be, and has been a mainstay ever since. And while this is where the story ends, like I said at the start, it may come as a surprise that its beginnings are not recent at all. In reality, in the interview, it's brought up that the idea of playing around permadeath has been a source of friction in the past, in particular with the director of the pre-FE6 era of Fire Emblem, Shozo Kaga. Iwata, you had similar discussions about the previous game, didn't you? Narihiro, Not only the previous one, but even before that too. In fact, in past titles we implemented a system for resurrection several times, and as a result the discussions came and went. Higuchi. Yes, it was like that. When we were working on Genealogy of the Holy War, right after I first joined the company, there were such discussions, or rather trends to system changes as well. It was released in 1996, so 14 years ago. At that time, it was in the planning stages, but the document said being killed up to 5 times is okay. When I saw that, I complained to the director at the time, saying, "We cannot do such a thing." It's difficult to interpret what exactly Higuchi meant by being killed up to 5 times is okay, because this wasn't explicitly something Kaga proposed by mouth as per the quote. It reads more like a note written somewhere that Higuchi took an issue with, because the context surrounding this answer was around Fire Emblem 4, which had a ranking system that permitted a maximum of 3-unit deaths before your combat rank in your playthrough dropped down to a B rank. Would being killed up to 5 times be okay until it started to affect your playthrough rank? However, given that Kaga and the team was facing pressure from Nintendo, and with Higuchi's words here, I personally interpret this as a mercy rule for individual units being able to reach 0 HP and coming back 5 times until permadeath actually sets in. I do think if it was meant to be read as something else, that note, or Higuchi's words, would have been more specific. It's an interesting dichotomy to think about. During the Kaga era of Fire Emblem, most of his games had ways to revive fallen characters with a one-use mechanic, such as the Lionhead statues from Gaiden and Echoes, and Arcanea and Yggdrasil's Alm and Valkyrie staff respectively. And yet, after his departure, and excluding remakes, the only time IS had this mechanic make a return was with Fire Emblem Fates, where, outside of Revelation, the Bifrost staff was available only on Conquest, the route deliberately built to act as more of a classic Fire Emblem experience. Maybe one would have expected Kaga to be less into the idea of revival mechanics before this video, and now may think differently. The idea that Fire Emblem had once considered a rule of your unit had to be defeated 5 times before they're gone for good is honestly shocking to me. I think part of why FE had such charm was because of its novelty in gameplay as a strategy RPG, but also that permadeath was implemented on purpose by Kaga to push the stakes in a playthrough more and to serve as another layer for each playthrough to be their own story, provided you didn't restart. Higuchi, being the guy to put the stop to this 5-try mercy rule, is pretty incredible with that in mind. It makes one wonder how those conversations between Intelligent Systems and Nintendo actually were, and how intense they actually got. The suits were trying to convince IS that their most iconic mechanic, permadeath, needed to go, but Higuchi knew what was up, and even told Kaga himself that he can't go through with this. I appreciate how faithful Higuchi has been to the core of Fire Emblem, even contesting the implementation of casual mode in FE12, only being able to slowly be convinced by his peer, Maeda, that it could be a good idea. This is perhaps a divisive opinion, but now with the implementation of rewinds on top of this, Fire Emblem is as accessible as Nintendo's vision could really ever be. Not only can you choose between casual and classic, but in either route, the proposed 5 tries till you die idea is basically doubled in Engage with 10 uses of the Dragon Time Crystal, and to a lesser extent, by virtue of 3 houses and Echoes starting off with 3 and going up to their max respective uses, those 2. I wonder if these were changes that Higuchi himself actually wanted. Casual mode is one extreme, classic is the other, rewind is the in-between. But it's kind of already even stronger than that scrapped idea already. I don't think rewind is a bad idea at all, and I think growth, long-term investment-based games like 3 Houses and Engage benefit greatly from it. But I wish more appeals were made to reward the player for a more classic approach, even in classic mode, with these rewind features. There's no accomplishment in Echoes, 3 Houses, or Engage for completing the game without the use of rewinds, and no game internally tracks your use of them at all. I'm not going to argue that more accessibility is a bad thing, but I would like to see an appeal to fans who want an even more difficult challenge and be rewarded for doing so. Something like what I mentioned just now that recognizes that you fought through bad RNG, perhaps even a unit death, and restarted an entire chapter to keep that no rewind record. Just something for players who want to push themselves even further. I'd like to see that as Fire Emblem continues to broaden its scope to newer players. Sure, it may appeal to a much smaller part of the player base, but more inclusivity on the opposite end won't hurt the other. It's often thought by many that Awakening introduced casual mode, when in fact, the start of this mode is in FE12 and functioned more as a method of play rather than a difficulty entirely, hence the separate choice. You can understand why the misconception exists though. FE12 was never released internationally, so as far as Westerners are concerned, Awakening did introduce casual mode and popularized it. With that all being said, I wonder what the next trick Ub Intelligent Systems' sleeve will be to widen their reach. Well folks, that will do it for today's video on the history of casual mode and why it happened. If you liked it, please make sure you leave a like on the video and comment down your thoughts on the whole mode itself, if you ever used the mode, or if you were surprised that conversations about a more casual playthrough of Fire Emblem came from even the SNES era. If you want to support the channel, you can always leave a subscription, and if you want to support even more and you can afford it, you can become a retainer as well. Thank you so much for your support as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Deuces.
You